we can't have complete abstinence, because I see a lot of parents wanting to say, well, I'm just going to take their phone away, or I'm not going to give them access to that. If you are an alcoholic, you can avoid alcohol. If you have trouble with cocaine, you can avoid cocaine. To me, this falls into more of the category of people who have real trouble with food. We can't just say, well, we're just going to take away food. For people who have trouble with sex, we're not just going to say, well, you shouldn't have sex ever again. So this is something that's just a part of our culture, a part of our worlds, and helping kids manage it is really what the goal is, I think, not this all or nothing. We can't have an all or nothing approach to this thing, that it's not going away. The toothpaste is out. It's not going away.
Welcome to Season 6 of Flusterclux with Lynn Lyons, where we talk about a family's anxiety and all the big feelings, too. We tackle the serious stuff without being too serious, and I'm your co-host, Robin. I'm Lynn's sister-in-law, and I'm here to ask your questions.
And I'm Lynn Lyons. I'm an anxiety expert, speaker, mom, and author, and I've been a therapist for over 30 years. Parenting can be a flusterclux, and I'm here to help you find your way. I'll give you concrete steps to take and the words to say. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this very exciting for me, I think it'll be exciting for you too, episode of Flusterclux, because I have a guest with me today. And also, what makes it a little different is that I don't have Robin here with me today. Robin is traveling. So for the first time in our Flusterclux history, she is not here. She is here in spirit, but she assures me that I can handle things on my own. And with the guest that we have today, I am quite confident. I have Devorah Heitner here. If you don't know about Devorah's work, you should. Her new book, Growing Up in Public, was released last month. I love it. I devoured it. And really, it couldn't be better timed, I think, which when you write a book and you publish a book, you really hope that it sort of sneaks right into what's going on in the world. And man, oh man, has Devorah done that. She is an author. She is out spreading the word. She's doing a ton of speaking. She engages with schools and with parents. She's just got incredibly valuable information. It's so concrete, which is why when I read that book, I was like, oh. And a lot of the stuff that she talks about totally intersects with what I talk about with anxiety, not surprisingly. Devorah, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much. I love your show and your work, and I'm so excited to talk because I think the intersection of anxiety and tech is so real.
It is so real. Can I just ask you how you became interested in this and sort of how that evolved for you?
Well, I wrote another book, Screenwise, years ago now, like 5 years ago, and was traveling with that and speaking at schools for a while. And before that, I was a media studies professor. But I've been speaking to parents, and a lot of parents were like, okay, I feel better about my kids' screen time and what they're like watching, but I'm still really nervous about what they're posting. And frankly, if there were pictures of me from middle school and high school and videos and even college, I would be very stressed out. I would be very worried. And I'm worried for my kid. This just doesn't seem like fair, because developmentally, you should be free to like experiment with your identity and even just do things that are dumb when you're a kid and a teenager and not have to deal with the consequences beyond the immediate moment. There are consequences and we need to deal with them. And we did when we were kids, but they didn't last and it didn't get so widespread. So I think parents got so worried about reputation. And then as I started diving into those questions of peer surveillance and kids canceling each other and reputation, I also recognized that parents are actually playing a role sometimes in surveilling our kids and sometimes even adding to the anxiety of growing up in the digital age, even though we don't want to. I have a teenager. I don't want to make it worse. I kind of think I'm answering the questions in this book that people were actually asking and answering a few that no one was asking, but I decided were important to answer.
Yeah. The question of surveillance, I think, and you have a great, is it the first chapter, I think, is on surveillance, because this is something that comes up for me all the time when I'm talking to parents who are anxious, to parents who have anxious kids, because one of the biggest things that I am promoting in my work is the development of autonomy. And boy, does surveillance get in the way of that. One of the things, I'm just wondering if you're hearing this or you're noticing this, is the more that parents are surveilling their kids, the more we're normalizing surveillance. I'm also seeing that it's starting to become normal in friendships and then also in relationships. So we've got kids who are in romantic relationships, they're starting to have sexual relationships. And this idea of surveillance is really becoming something that is causing a lot of issues in relationships. And I'm just wondering, as you were writing about this and you're learning about this, are you seeing that trend also? That the surveillance is sort of moving into the peer realm also?
100%. I mean, there's snap maps where kids can see where each other's locations are on Snapchat, and kids don't love it and find it stressful. And obviously, it can lead to feelings of exclusion if you can see where all your friends are at any given time. Or for me, it could lead to, I don't have it because it would make me nutsy. And I don't really use Snapchat in the same way that most kids do. But I also would just feel like I'm just not that cool if I had it. Like, I don't know if I would feel left out because my friends don't all know each other. So it's extremely unlikely they'd all be together without me, unlike when you're in high school. But it is possible that they'd all be out on Saturday night and I'd be like, well, I'm home. What's wrong with me? Think that is a lot to manage, but no one wants to take themselves off the map because especially when you're a teenager, you want to be regarded. You want people to know where you are. You want to think that people are thinking about you. And you probably, I mean, all of us, our whole lives overestimate probably how much others are thinking about us, but the teenage years are like peak overestimating how much other people are thinking about you. And so this kind of feeds right into that. And no one wants to take themselves off the map and sort of be forgotten.
My boys are 23 and 25. They got smartphones pretty late in life because I was just a few years ahead of that expectation. But one of the things that I found with tracking kids is that I felt like it got in the way of them developing the ability to communicate responsibly with me. That if I took all of the pressure off them, all the onus off them, and that all I had to do was look at their phone and find out when they were showing up, when they were going to be back from their basketball game, when they were going to be here or there. They didn't have a responsibility to say, hey, Mom, the bus is going to be late. Don't come pick me up now. Or, hey, Mom, I was at Sam's house, but now I'm going over to Brendan's house. It took the onus off them to lift up their heads and communicate. That's one of the things that I think with the surveillance, it's really getting in the way of them learning how to responsibly communicate.
I know. I'm so glad that my son's cross-country coach this semester accepts texts because I do think expecting kids to email may not be the most realistic thing in the world. And I know there are all kinds of questions about whether anyone should be texting teachers, but when you do it through an app like Remind, I think it becomes a lot safer. Like they're not using one another's personal phone. So I think that takes away a lot of the kind of concern about texting. But I do think for him to be like, oh, I can't go to cross country today because I have this thing with debate or whatever, and have the coach be able to get back and have that be his responsibility and not mine. Just like baby steps, but these pandemic kids who my kid didn't go to 6th grade. He's starting high school, having sort of never really started middle school. He just like missed some, and his whole crew and cohort missed these like big onboarding experiences. And some kids have, I think, tons of experience and executive function to kind of organize their lives and speak to adults. But many high school kids I talked to, and middle school kids even more, and even college students that I taught, were intimidated to email professors, just weren't quite there with that communication. And I think if we take the onus off them completely, like you never have to text anyone because we'll just life 360 you and find your location. It's not a great way to teach communication. Like if I'm going to be late, I don't want my husband to find out because he's tracking me.
Right, exactly. It's just courtesy, right? It's being able to say, oh, I'm responsible to let other people know what's going on rather than not having to do that. Yeah, I totally agree. One of the things when I was reading your book, and this is something that I talk about a lot, but there was something I learned that I did not know about because I am not a big fan of parent portals. I feel like they create an enormous amount of conflict in families that in terms of anxiety, when I look at sort of compulsive behavior and the dopamine hit that you get, I treat OCD, right? So this is just more content for OCD to grab onto that I have to be constantly looking at these grades all the time. I mean, up to 20 to 30 times a day, kids are checking their grades. I didn't know, because my kids are older, I didn't know about Class Dojo. And just in case anybody doesn't know what this is, it's a behavior tracking app. And there are things like you raised your hand before speaking out, or you stayed in your seat, or you were lining up correctly. So you earn points for that, but then you get points taken away if you speak out in class or if you're disruptive in any way. So the whole day, earning points and losing points, earning points and losing points. I mean, I just can't imagine. I mean, I guess I can imagine, which is why it's so appalling to me. You have like a little 8-year-old kid who's got ADHD, and the whole day they're just getting doing, 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 doing. Adults would not tolerate this in their workplace.
Yes. I almost want the scary music in your podcast to accompany dojo, because I'm actually very grateful. My kid is sort of class dojo generation, but we didn't experience it. We did experience some other behavior monitoring systems at school that are more old school that I also have problems with. But this takes the sort of public shaming chart that was like in front of the classroom where kids got clipped up to like red or green or yellow. And I'm sure a lot of kids you've worked with have like traumatic memories of these experiences of being publicly shamed for behavior, which we know is about self-regulation, which we know comes much more easily to some kids than others. One of the points that I make in my book is that using an app like Class Dojo, which takes that behavior chart and shares it with parents all day, is not telling parents, first of all, anything you didn't know. Like if you have a kid who struggles to self-regulate, you're not going to be like, shocker, Mike spoke without raising his hand. Like, can't believe it. But you don't need to be at your work desk at 11 a.m. getting that notice that your kid spoke without raising their hand. What you want to know is that the teacher is compassionately dealing with your kids' self-regulation challenges and also, frankly, just accepting that some self-regulation expectations actually may not be developmentally appropriate for all kids.
Correct. And that we have good days and bad days. Yeah. In your book, you said that 95% of elementary schools use Class Dojo.
Let me be really clear. It's in 95% of schools, according to their data, which means that some teachers are choosing to use it because this is a teacher-led app. Class Dojo, the founder was very smart and was like, I'm going to go to teachers with this app. So schools don't have to adopt it. And I actually interviewed for the book a school district where they forbid it. You could be at a school where the teacher across the hall is using it and your kid's teacher isn't. Or your kid's teacher could be using it very minimally for a few features, but not using it to track behavior. But it is fundamentally a behavior tracking app. And many teachers who use it are sharing that data with parents and also sometimes publicly in some ways with the kids, which means your kid is at risk of being sort of publicly shamed and admonished in the classroom. And they're doing it in this group way where it's like, oh, your table gets or loses points. So if your kid struggles with self-regulation, everyone at their table is going to be mad at them because they didn't get to go to the treasure box because their points got lowered because, again, your kid got up out of their seat or whatever. It's awful.
Yeah. As I was reading it, I used the word awful in my head as well. It's terrible.
It's really bad. And I think it's really damaging. And what I heard from parents is that even the most compliant and self-regulated kids, like picture a neurotypical girl, which is like who elementary school is designed for,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Like, the behavior expectations and sedentary expectations are probably not really designed for any kids. I'm going to say like even neurotypical girls should certainly move more during the elementary school days. So I just want to put in a plug. I was that girl, compliant enough. Like I didn't get in trouble a lot. Those are the kids who probably could do most of the things, right? Like those are the kids who are not getting in trouble that much. Like a neurotypical girl in second grade is probably not getting in trouble a lot for like calling out in class, for getting up out of her seat. Like she can probably hold that together, even if it's not great for her. And these are kids who are also internalizing and they're getting in trouble because they want to be a good kid. The one time they mess up, like one of the moms I interviewed for the book had this kid who was so into learning and so into school and was able to do most of the developmentally inappropriate things that schools want little kids to do and still felt bad because the one time she sort of did call out in enthusiasm in class, she got dinged. And she noticed that there was multiple standards, that different kids were actually being held to different standards, which is a way for teachers to try to make this kind of behavior tracking more fair by, noticing that kids who struggle with self-regulation maybe shouldn't get dinged as much to try to prevent what you were just talking about. But then this poor girl who felt so good about school and was so trying so hard just had so much anxiety that the teacher didn't like her anymore, that she was out of the teacher's good regard. And if you think kids don't care what teachers think of them, you are very wrong. Kids absolutely care and they know.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think about the kids that I work with perfectionism. If they get a 97 on a test, they're devastated. What I'm trying to say to kids is we're talking about flexibility here. We're talking about good days and bad days. We're talking about strengths and weaknesses. You are a person made up of all sorts of different things and all sorts of strengths and weaknesses. When I was reading this chapter, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe this exists. And then I thought, well, yeah, I can believe it exists, but pretty shocking to me.
Well, and I think what the existence of this app really shows us is that teachers are not getting enough support in learning how to effectively manage classrooms, and that schools are places that fundamentally still very much misunderstand behavior.
Yeah, I agree, because I am in schools all the time talking about anxiety. One thing that I've sort of accepted over time is when I go into a school, I make a presumption, which I know now is not accurate, that most people have got some information or some training about anxiety. And even worse, if we're talking about OCD. And that just is not the case. I think you're right that it really does sort of illuminate that problem, doesn't it?
It really, really does.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I have a few other questions for you because I know that parents are going to be so eager to hear your tips. People love to hear the do's and don'ts. So when we come back, we're going to talk about that.
Awesome.
Can I tell you a secret? I am very active, but I've reached the age that when I travel and when I present, I'm looking for comfortable shoes. I've entered comfortable shoe territory. It's just my reality.
This is a post-high heels Lynn speaking.
It is totally post-high heels, Lynn.
But you still have to look stylish too, and you have to have those sensible shoes, not an easy find.
My Vessies are the answer. I'm telling you, these shoes are the best. I went on a trip recently and I forgot my workout shoes and I wore my Vessies to walk miles and miles and miles. And I'm telling you, they were so comfortable. I had no issues with them and I was looking pretty darn stylish.
Well, if you haven't met Vessi yet, imagine shoes that can handle anything from a milk spill to a sudden shower to a tropical storm. I love that they're lightweight and waterproof.
I am serious. My Vessies are a lifesaver.
You've got to check out Vessi shoes.
Go to vessi.com/fluster. That's VESSI.com/fluster and enter code FLUSTER at checkout to receive your 15% discount.
Plus, they've got free shipping to a bunch of places. So score your new Mom Life Essential with 15% off by going to vessi.com/fluster using the code at checkout. With the busy fall season already in swing, you might be looking for wholesome, convenient meals for jam-packed days. Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, can help you fuel up fast for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. With chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. You'll save time, eat well, and stay on track for your healthy lifestyle. So if you're too busy to cook this fall, but you want to make sure you're eating well, with Factor, skip the extra trip at the grocery store and the chopping and prepping and cleaning up too. You'll still get the flavor and the nutrients you need with Factor's fresh, never frozen meals. And they're ready in just 2 minutes. All you have to do is heat them up and enjoy. And I gotta tell you, I got sick this past month. I had a fridge full of Factor meals and it fed everybody, and it was the greatest gift. Relish the best of autumn with fall flavors with limited time only hearty, comforting meals featuring seasonal veggies like cranberry pecan chicken and apple Dijon pork chops. Again, they're ready in just 2 minutes. So this October, get Factor and enjoy eating well without the hassle. Head to factormeals.com/fluster50 and use code FLUSTER50 to get 50% off. That's code FLUSTER50 at factormeals.com/fluster50 to get 50% off. It's the season when kids head back to school and life moves indoors. So this inevitably brings more germs and opportunities to start feeling under the weather. But stay ahead of the game with Beekeepers Naturals Propolis Throat Spray and their new Kids Propolis Throat Soothing Lollipops. Propolis Throat Spray is available in adults and kids versions, and it's a great daily proactive immune support that tastes good and it soothes your throat. And those kids' throat-soothing lollipops are the most delicious dose of defense. They're providing propolis, vitamin D, zinc, and wildflower honey to soothe kids' throats and support their immune systems. So include those lollipops as one of your back-to-school lunchbox sweet treats. But these have 50% less sugar, so your kids won't crash after lunch. Sometimes, as you know, it can be a battle to get kids to take medicines and supplements, but they actually love the taste of Beekeepers Naturals products. So today, Beekeepers Naturals is offering you an exclusive offer. Go to beekeepersnaturals.com/flusterclux and enter code Flusterclux to get 20% off your order. That's beekeepersnaturals.com/flusterclux or enter the code Flusterclux. Beekeepers Naturals products are also available at Target, Whole Foods, Amazon, CVS, and Walgreens.
Okay, we're back. All right, so we're back here with the amazing Devorah Heitner, whose new book, Growing Up in Public, has just been published. By the time this podcast comes out, it's probably been out for several weeks now. And Devorah's been making the rounds, talking about this and sharing what is just incredibly valuable information. Okay, so Devorah, one of the other chapters that really caught my attention was the chapter about self-disclosure. And one of the things that I hear a lot is that adults are just so much more uncomfortable with the level of self-disclosure that's much more common for kids. But there are good ways and bad ways to self-disclose. There are good ways and bad ways to use social media to reveal things about yourself. And it becomes, for me, an issue of, which I talk about all the time, that I learned from my mentor, Michael Yapko, the concept of differentiation. The ability to differentiate between when you disclose and when you don't, between what you share, who you share it with. Those are choices that we want kids to make because it's not black or white. It's not all or nothing. As you were researching this book and writing this book, what were some of the things that really jumped out at you about this concept of self-disclosure?
I initially was more on the side of, I'm a privacy-loving Gen Xer, why are kids oversharing? And then I started talking with kids and learning the ways kids are really on the front lines of destigmatizing, talking about things like mental health, for example, and LGBTQ plus identities and neurodivergent identities. I recognize that there's a lot of really positive aspects to the ways kids are disclosing and changing the culture. That said, I think when kids share really vulnerable experiences, sometimes they are hoping for a response that they're not going to get or for a level of support that's very unlikely on social media. And often what we see is kids' existing social status gets reinforced. If you have a kid who's already got a strong social group or is popular, if you will, or even just has, again, like a robust friend group, even if they don't identify as popular, they're going to get a more supportive response. But if you have a kid who's struggling socially and they go to social media and reveal something more personal about themselves, they may not get that support, which is tremendously unfair, but that's kind of the reality of the situation. And it also depends in what ways kids reveal. Kids are very critical of one another sometimes. Like, kids are supportive in some ways. Kids are much more supportive of neurodivergence and LGBTQ plus identities in some ways in some communities. So I'll qualify that. They can also be awful to one another and mean and very intolerant, but there are ways that they can be very supportive. And they certainly are more linguistically aware. You'll see hashtags like AUDIT or PAN or Demi, and like the kids know what they mean and adults are like, what in the heck are they talking about? I've never heard of that hashtag, or I don't know about that identity. And I think that's important. The kids are kind of literate in this stuff in a different way. At the same time, you brought up, your recent writing about self-diagnosis, and I agree, like self-diagnosis is a very complicated and thorny issue. We can come back to that maybe later. So let me just say about kids self-disclosing, it's very tricky because in one way, I'm really excited about what they're doing. And I truly believe that kids are making the world better and that we should fight for a better world and not to silence kids. In other words, if your kid wants to come out, they identify, say, as gay and they want to come out online, you might be worried, and you would be understandably worried. Like, listen, statistics of national school climate show that gay kids are getting harassed in school. They are experiencing homophobia. At the same time, your kid may have a supportive friend group. They probably have given some real thought to coming out. They're not just coming out with no plan. It's less likely to be impulsive than you might think. It's more likely that they have really considered it. And there's some real upsides to coming out online. One girl I interviewed told me, hey, this is a lot easier than coming out to everyone I meet. Like, it actually, like, I get it done. It's done. Then they can look me up on Instagram. It's in my bio. It's good. If they're homophobic, they can leave me alone. If it's a boy that was going to ask me out, they'll know not to try. Like, it's just really great. And it's still somewhat locked down. Her personal profile has some safety on it and some, privacy measures. So she felt like this is great. And it saves me a lot of energy. And you can also delete the negative comments, which you see, like, if you watch even the Netflix show Heartstopper, which I love and refer to a lot, and I think does a really good job of showing the ways kids use tech, even though it's a fictional story based on a graphic novel. It still shows both a couple in the first season, two girls in a relationship come out. And then in the second season, Nick comes out as bisexual and as being in a relationship with Charlie. And in both cases, you see them going through the responses and editing out the negative responses. And what an empowering thing to be able to do. So in that way, it's awesome. On the other hand, when parents say, what if my kid is coming out not as gay, but like as neurodivergent? What if they can't get a job? And again, I would argue for a world where neurodivergent people don't face that kind of discrimination and they face more understanding and accommodation at work. And there is the question of, do you want to work at a place that wouldn't hire someone with ADHD anyway, right? But I do think it's important for parents to recognize that the kids are in a fundamentally different world and that their whole generation will be filled with people who have come out, whether it's neurodivergence, whether it's queerness, whether it's mental health issues. And we are living in a very different world than when I was in high school in the 1990s and saw a therapist and told no one. None of my friends knew I saw a therapist when I was a teenager. And some of them were probably also seeing therapists, but some of us talked about it. And now we live in a world where kids could disclose that to a friend. And I'm really grateful to live in a world where a kid could be like, gotta bounce, I've got therapy.
Yeah.
I still respect kids' rights to keep it private. So I'm not saying that if your kid is in therapy, they need to tell their friends. It's totally up to them. And I think it's totally okay to choose to keep it private.
Right. And I think from the perspective of being that therapist that people are coming to and talking about stuff, for me, and I've talked about this and written about this, the concern that I have often is that the information they're getting about mental health at this point is really not great. If I am looking at kids that are looking up whether or not they have OCD and they're getting information from Khloe Kardashian, or I'm looking up kids that are trying to determine whether or not they're on the spectrum, even adult influencers actually that I look at, like people that are pretty well known, when I hear the way they talk about anxiety, sometimes when I hear the way they talk about OCD, when they talk about depression, oh my gosh, it just makes I'm making this face now that, it's so cringy to me. And the other thing too, and you address this in the book, which I think is fabulous, is that what happens when the support that one is getting, particularly for mental health issues, isn't really support, but it actually is more of taking on an identity that's permanent where it shouldn't be. Depression is not a permanent disorder, and they're learning, unfortunately, how to do the disorder in a way that they wouldn't have figured out on their own.
I think a kid who's in treatment for something like, say, an eating disorder or anything that could be really reinforced by participating in a community that's not really about recovery, then that is a kid who, as much as I think mentoring over monitoring, that is a kid who I would be much more careful about their online access and what communities they're part of. And that should be a treatment plan that they have with their therapist. Because this is, if you have a kid with a serious phobia, with an eating disorder, something that's interfering with their daily lives and their health, causing school avoidance, et cetera. Like those are situations where hopefully you are in a treatment plan. There is a third person involved. It's not just the parent and the kid. Because I think in general, parents should not just randomly monitor their kids. And I think that does increase anxiety and increase conflict and decrease autonomy, which is all not good. But on the other hand, if you have a kid who's just been released from inpatient for like an ED, that's a kid who probably should have their phone for only a limited amount of time. Like I don't want to cut that kid off from their friend, but that kid should not be getting on Pinterest and looking at recipes.
Right.
That's toxic. So we have to just be careful. And I think we have to treat it. And it's tricky because you cannot treat the internet and social media the way you would treat another substance, for example. And I know people like Anna Lemke have made the connection, in her work and sort of talked about this as like a substance that you can be addicted to. And I'm very careful about that. And there's real limits, I think, to the addiction metaphor with tech. At the same time, there is problematic use, and I agree with that. But I'll just say that I do think for some people, the relationship with tech does get really tricky. But unlike an illegal drug or alcohol, where you could just eliminate it from your life and be in recovery that way, there is no life that I predict for these kids that is going to be a completely unplugged life. Like even if you're running your organic farm's going to need a website. I don't believe that complete opting out is an option. So to come back to kids in real struggle, I do think those kids for a time may need to have a more controlled access until they are in a more even place, in a more recovered place where they can maybe have more full access. Also need to be able to have self-knowledge to say, like, maybe this app should never be on my phone. Like for a kid with OCD, the grading app should never be on their phone. I mean, I would say for most kids, the grading app shouldn't be on their phone, but I do know kids who could have the grading app on their phone without it becoming a problem. I'll put it that way. Ideally, it's not on anyone's phone, but I think there are kids who could have it on their phone and they'd still only check it every couple of weeks when they really need to check it, but they wouldn't be checking it multiple times a day.
The tricky part is that if somebody is coming out of treatment for an eating disorder, we're all very clear about what are we going to put in place and what's part of the treatment plan. The trickier part is for kids that aren't getting professional help. So they're using their social media as their treatment, and that becomes really tricky. A point that you just made that I think is so important when you're talking about we can't have complete abstinence, because I see a lot of parents wanting to say, well, I'm just going to take their phone away, or I'm not going to give them access to that. If you are an alcoholic, you can avoid alcohol. If you have trouble with cocaine, you can avoid cocaine. To me, this falls into more of the category of people who have trouble with food. We can't just say, well, we're just going to take away food. For people who have trouble with sex, we're not just going to say, well, you shouldn't have sex ever again. So this is something that's just a part of our culture, a part of our worlds, and helping kids manage it is really what the goal is, I think, not this all or nothing. We can't have an all or nothing approach to this thing, that it's not going away. The toothpaste is out. It's not going away.
Absolutely.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and then I have a few rapid fire questions for you so that we can help parents have some really good takeaways. So we'll be right back.
Do you think seeing a therapist or psychiatrist would be helpful, but you don't really have time to actually find one and meet with them? Try Talkspace. By doing everything online, Talkspace has made getting the help you want easy, accessible, and affordable. It's incredibly convenient to have virtual sessions with your licensed therapist from the comfort of your own home. Talkspace is secure and private, using the latest end-to-end bank-grade encryption technology to store client information and comply with the latest HIPAA regulations. And Talkspace is affordable because it's in-network with most major insurers. So, as a listener of this podcast, you'll get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/Fluster. To match with a licensed therapist today, go to Talkspace.com/Fluster to get $80 off your first month as a listener of this show. That's Talkspace.com/Fluster.
Exercise is one of the main things that helps people with anxiety and depression.
We've talked about this a lot, actually, and you're an exerciser. I'm one of those people who has to overcome resistance to exercise. So there are things, though, that really make it better, and that's why I love Copilot.
The thing about Copilot is that it gives you real person accountability. It makes expert training affordable.
I love that I get to connect with a real life trainer. It's fantastic even when I'm traveling, because just in my hotel room, my trainer knows how to customize a workout for what I bring to the table. And it keeps me consistent and holds me accountable.
It's so cost effective compared to traditional in-person training. That's what Copilot offers people who are busy, who are on the go, but who really need somebody to walk them through and to keep track for them.
I'd love for you all to follow our lead and get fit and feel fabulous and give Copilot a try and find out why it was listed by Forbes as the top-rated personal trainer app of 2023.
Head to go.mycopilot.com/Flusterclux to get a 14-day free trial with your own personal trainer.
That's go.mycopilot.com/Flusterclux to get a free 14-day trial with your very own personal trainer and take a back seat and let Copilot help you reach your fitness goals.
Okay, so now back to the show. Okay, so here are the questions that I get all the time, Devorah, and I bet they're the ones that you get frequently too. What age should you give your child a smartphone?
I would say when they kind of need to be in the world with significant independence and when they need to be making their own social plans. So work your way back from when it would be kind of ridiculous or problematic socially. High school, you can't make your kids social plans. You're not going to call another 10th grader's mom to make a play date for your sophomore in high school. You may end up texting that mom about pickup from the amusement park out of state or something. So I'm not suggesting, we're never going to be involved with other parents, but you wouldn't even want your kid to go out of state to that amusement park without a phone. So work your way back from like that kid in 10th grade to, okay, what about 8th grade? Do you want your kid to be able to make their own plans, or do you want to be in charge of their plans? What about 6th grade? At some point, probably for a lot of kids in the middle grades or middle school, you want them to start taking over, making their own plans, and you want them to be able to be maybe in whatever is downtown for you or whatever is kind of out in the library or someplace in your community that's not with you, and when they need to be home alone. So those are a few independence milestones that I think are kind of phone necessity or some access to a phone. Now, you could get a really simple phone for those situations and not get your kid a full smartphone yet.
Do you think that's coming back into popularity? Do you see that as a trend moving back toward I'm going to give my child a phone that isn't a smartphone? Or do you think that's not really happening?
I don't see it in a big way. I mean, there are some sort of baby phones on the market, and I can give you a link to an article in Romper where my friend Meg Saint Esprit summarizes a bunch of the options out there. There's like starter phones, if you will. I think most parents give their kids an old phone of theirs, and it's going to be a smartphone, or they go to a watch with especially elementary schoolers. I think the watches can also drive anxiety. I have some questions about the watches, but a lot of families love them, but I'm really leery of them being used as a tracking and surveillance device. So I think the watches are a kind of a yellow light place for me, but I do understand why kids and families like them. And they certainly are easier to keep track of, which would have been an issue. Like if we had gone down that road with my kid in elementary school, there was a pandemic and he didn't get to do the end of elementary school or the beginning of middle school. So, he was out of school for almost 2 years here, but we didn't need a phone because he was just home. But we actually got it partly because we wanted to be able to leave him home alone. And we don't have a house phone. And that's a huge driver, I think, for some parents. Some parents are doing it because they have very popular elementary or middle school kids and their phones are getting blown up by their kids' friends. And, there's only so many texts you want to get from 11-year-olds before you're like, wow, I'm spending my day fielding my kids' social life. But you don't have to give them 24/7 access to it. You don't have to allow them to add social apps. There are a lot of decisions you can make as a parent that can sort of slow your roll, if you will, with a phone and give them an opportunity to, for example, get good at things like texting before they add an app like Instagram or Discord.
What about, I think you'll agree with me, but I'm curious. I think phones in the bedroom, particularly for kids, I think they're not so great for adults either, actually. I've said on the podcast, my alarm clock broke. And so I started using my phone as an alarm clock. And boy, did I quickly start to develop bad habits that I swore I would never develop, right? I mean, I'm like waking up and looking at Twitter before I get out of bed. Yikes. It's like reaching over and lighting up a cigarette. I'm pretty adamant with parents that one of the things that we need to model for kids and to pay attention is to keep those phones out of the bedroom. The research about sleep and attention and all that kind of stuff. Is that something that you would be with me on, or do you have a more nuanced view of that as well?
I think out of the bedroom, certainly for younger kids, 100%. I don't see any benefit from middle schooler and elementary schooler and much more downside. I think by the end of high school, they should be learning to self-regulate because they're going to potentially be in college or living independently. And I don't think that should be necessarily their first experience with self-regulation. That said, I mean, that a high schooler in love might stay up all night and text their sweetie. There's a lot of things that might happen at night. I worry about for younger kids is more like the disinhibition late at night and the social conflict. Nothing good happens after 11 on that middle school group text. The longer you can kind of, I think, enforce kids staying off of that, it's actually a relief also to kids to not have to explain why they're not there, to be like, oh, my mean parents don't let me have my phone at night. And that excuse does take you kind of through middle school. By early high school, I think kids can say their own thing, like, I have early practice, I need my sleep, whatever. And even putting a boundary with friends, like, don't text me at 1 a.m. I've got practice. I've got chorus. I got to be up at 6 a.m. Don't do this. And I think I want to appeal to kids' own desire to get their sleep and use every authority figure you can, like the coach, the music teacher, anyone who can appeal to even their vanity at this age. Just be like, you're going to look cuter if you get your sleep. I was young and I avoided sleep by staying up, sometimes sneaking the phone or reading late at night, way before TikTok and Discord. And I was staying up late and, was exhausted. My parents appealed to me with the hope that I would get to be a little taller because you grow in your sleep.
Oh, yes. Wow, that's very clever.
And so I really was hoping for 5'4". I never got there, but I'm still 5'3". Probably shrinking at this point. But the hope that I would get taller was somewhat inspiring for me.
Okay. And last question. In your talking about this, in your research and your observation, I am seeing a lot of parents who are really having a hard time following their own rules, bringing phones to the dinner table. There's that term technoference where little kids, babies, are really finding that they're not connecting. There's a lot of stuff. When I see a 2-year-old with the smartphone in the grocery store, it breaks my heart because that's when I would talk to my kids. Look at the yellow, look at the blue. But a lot of parents using their devices, using their phones in a way that is modeling for kids exactly what we don't want to model, which is, for me, disconnection, lack of empathy, lack of eye contact, all of that stuff that is really preventative when we're talking about mental health and social connection. What are you hearing from parents? What are you seeing? What advice can you give to people listening about their own technology use?
I think we all could be more mindful about our use of tech, and I definitely include myself, and I'm sure my kid and my spouse would be happy to give you examples of like ways that I've fubbed them, like ignored them and been like, no, but I'm launching my book, or no, but this is really important. And I think either of my close family members could say like, but my thing is really important too. And I think it's very important to not feel like your stuff is too important, and to recognize that your family or your friends or the people you're actually with in the room are the most important. So having rooms where your phones don't go, like we try not to bring phones or computers into actually the room where we watch TV, but it's like the room where we do that together. We never bring to the table. That actually we're pretty good about. I would say that table is less of a conflict. Sometimes phones want to sneak in when we're watching TV, and I'm kind of guilty of that. My son will be like, wait, didn't you write in your first book, screen-wise, like no double screening? So I think that's really important. And then obviously kids are very sensitive to like if you're texting and driving, if you're asking them how their day was and asking questions that are specific, like how did this thing go or that thing go? And then you ask again because you didn't really listen to the answer. Kids hate that. I work with kids at schools, and one of the things I love to do with them is design apps that address some of these problems. I've had kids design an app to keep their parents from sharing photos without permission, and design an app to keep their parents just off their phone because they're obsessed.
Yeah, that's great advice. Is there anything that we didn't talk about, any nugget, any gem, any warning that you want to put out there that you really want people to hear?
I just think the most important thing we can do is stay curious. Stay curious about our kids' experiences. Stay curious about what they're learning, the positive and challenging experiences they're having on social media. Be in the conversation with them. So we really want to mentor our kids and not just monitor them. And we can learn from them and the experiences they're having in digital communities. So I would say, stay curious and also talk with your friends. I mean, my book comes with a discussion guide, and there's lots of other great books on this topic and articles. Get together with your friends and read an article or a book and talk about it, because I think as we parent, we're often very isolated. And I think screen time is one of those issues. We tend to be like a little embarrassed maybe about what we don't know, and maybe not talk to other parents. And other parents can be great resources and just sounding boards for this stuff.
Fantastic. That's such great advice. Thank you so much for joining me. As I said, I loved your book. I love the information you're putting out there. It couldn't have come at a better time, this post-pandemic place where we're just all trying to sort of figure out where we go from here. Everybody, you should grab a copy of Growing Up in Public. Thank you for being here, and I wish you all the best with your endeavors and your information. It's just such valuable stuff. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I feel the same way about your work. I'm really happy to be in this conversation.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for listening. And if you found this podcast helpful, please give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It helps other people find this information.
And if you'd like to dig deeper on any of these topics, we have specialized playlists on our Spotify profile, and the link is in the show notes. Topics like teens, depression, and OCD. Bye, Lynn.
Bye, Robin.
If you like this show, there's a decent chance you'll also enjoy the Shameless Mom Academy. Hi, I'm Sarah Dean, the founder and host of the Shameless Mom Academy. The Shameless Mom Academy is a podcast for moms that centers moms more than it centers your kids. I'm not going to teach you how to make baby food or how to make your 3-year-old or 13-year-old stop having tantrums. Instead, I'm going to bring you back to yourself. For the last 20 years, I've been helping moms through growth and transformation. Inside the Shameless Mom Academy, I help you identify who you are and who you are becoming. Look, motherhood is hard. It brought me to my knees many times and sometimes still does. Returning to who I am and who I am becoming allows me to decide how to show up in all those sticky motherhood moments, but also in all my other relationships and in all the ways I show up in my various communities. So come check out the Shameless Mom Academy wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm willing to bet you'll leave feeling a little inspired and maybe even completely fired up. And you'll probably laugh a few times because I promise we never take ourselves too seriously over here. With 700 episodes to choose from, you're likely going to find something that sparks and speaks to you inside the Shameless Mom Academy.